Major funding provided by the Albert and Ethel Hertzstein Charitable Foundation, Fulbright and Jaworski, and Strasburger and Price.
The Harris County Courthouse is the symbol of Harris County government.
I think it really matches the spirit of Houston.
The designer of the building had studied under Frank Lloyd Wright.
The 50s renovation really took its toll on it.
And the question was what to do with it.
It needed to be back to its glory days.
To see the building after its restoration is just incredible.
Words just cannot really describe the building, and you really have to see it.
On a warm August morning in 2011, hundreds of people gathered in busy downtown Houston for the rededication of the historic Harris County Courthouse. Closed for renovation in 2007, the rededication ceremony marked the first time anyone could see inside the restored 100-year-old structure.
Pretty ornate up there in the corners.
Yeah, and there's like little cross stitching all around the top of that corner.
When constructed in 1910, the Harris County Courthouse was one of the largest and most modern courthouses in Texas. But by the year 2000, the courthouse was badly in need of repair. A major remodeling in the 1950s had destroyed many of the architectural features of the building. Most county residents had forgotten the once elegant and grand courthouse, which seemed to belong to a different era.
It's an expression of the way that Harris County saw itself at the turn of the century. It was really big and really expensive at the time it was built.
I think it made a statement about Harris County when you had an impressive courthouse.
The 1910 Harris County Courthouse was built to serve the needs of a fast-growing county. It was also designed to be a symbol of the growing prominence and the can-do spirit of its county seat, Houston.
It reflected the pride and really the future that the founders of Houston planned for our city.
When Houston was first mapped out, the Allen brothers, the city's founders, designated one square block for the courthouse.
The first courthouse was two-story of dressed lumber. In 1852, we got our second courthouse. And that was basically a one-room, square brick building that was 2 stories high with cupola on the top.
Construction of Harris County's third courthouse began around 1860. Before the building was finished, the Civil War broke out, and the Confederate Army appropriated the structure for use as a hospital and storage facility for cannonballs and other wartime supplies.
So after the Civil War, Harris County's dead broke, has no money, but they're able to finish out the courthouse and move into it. And in 1881, that courthouse was torn down. It had finally, I think, done its best service. And they built a new courthouse. And this courthouse was our Victorian courthouse. It was very beautiful and Gothic and what we think of when we think of the glory days of Texas courthouses.
At the turn of the 20th century, Houston was growing in population and becoming a regional center of trade and culture. Houstonians enjoyed performances at the Sweeney and Coombs Opera House across the street from the courthouse and shopped at stores such as Foley Brothers. As Houston grew, it became apparent that in order to conduct county business, larger and more modern facilities were needed. So the 1884 courthouse was demolished to make way for the 1910 courthouse. 13 architectural firms submitted proposals for the new courthouse. The winning firm was Lang and Witchell.
The Harris County Commissioners specified that they wanted a building with a dome and with columns. And that was kind of 2 competing architectural styles, but what you ended up with was what the commissioners wanted, a building with a dome and columns, but also with little bits of prairie style and Frank Lloyd Wright ornamentation.
The exterior was adorned with pink Texas granite and light brown St. Louis brick.
They wanted a modern courthouse. And they got one. They got elevators. They had a ladies' restroom, which was a huge improvement since there had been no ladies' restroom in the 1884 courthouse because, of course, women, there was no reason for them to be in there.
All jurors were men. Women didn't get to become jurors until the mid-1950s. And so the men would come to the courthouse as jurors, and there was a dormitory in the courthouse with rooms where they stayed, and someone would air out the linens.
The formal dedication ceremony of Harris County's new state-of-the-art courthouse was a huge public event, attracting more than 30,000 people.
It was on Texas Independence Day, just March 2nd. People were coming through the courthouse, and they'd look at the marble, and the way the marble was positioned, it made pictures. And they would look to find the pictures in the marble. They'd say, oh, there's a woman with a feather in her hat, and there's a dog hunting, and did you see this and that?
I'm sure it was an awe-inspiring place for people to try cases, for people who had litigation to come into and to be in those surroundings.
In the 1880s and 90s, residents in the 254 counties in Texas wanted to have an elegantly designed courthouse. It meant the county was thriving, and that led to new businesses and people moving in.
It was competitive. Each community wanted the bigger one than maybe their neighbors. We read about that all the time, that they wanted it a little bit better.
By the beginning of the 20th century, county courthouses had become stately civic monuments, often referred to as temples of justice.
People came into town to do their business file deeds, pay taxes, and so they needed a stately building that had that sort of importance of civic architecture.
One of the main functions of any courthouse is to keep the records of its citizens.
It kept all the records of the courts.
Many people were married there. Many had to go to probate with very emotional times or had a court case, civil or criminal. There's just so much that would happen there that it endeared it to many people. Maybe good memories, maybe tough memories, but nonetheless a great emotional tie to so many people in the community.
Harris County's 1910 courthouse featured separate waiting rooms for white and black citizens.
There was not only segregation of the races, there was segregation of the sexes. Women should not be required to wait in the same area with rough men. You know, men had spittoons. There were spittoons all over this courthouse that were freely used by judges, jurors, and everyone else. So it was conceived as not being a genteel place to be.
Traditionally, the courthouse was where men reported for jury duty.
It's a symbol that there is justice, that if you have a problem, you can bring it to the courthouse, and we have a fair system where your neighbors will come down and hear the case, and you'll have justice.
By the 1950s, Harris County was the largest county in Texas with nearly 1 million residents. The old courthouse was outdated and overcrowded, and county officials made plans to modernize the 45-year-old building.
The 50s renovation really took its toll on it, had taken away most of the ornamentation and detail, and it just really wasn't very attractive anymore.
I mean, it looked like a bad 1950s office building with drop ceilings and dark paneling and fluorescent lighting, and you would have no idea of what was behind all that.
The 1954 remodeling included plans for more courtrooms to accommodate the ever-increasing number of trials in Harris County.
The courthouse was so stressed and so overcrowded.
Much-needed central air conditioning was added during the renovation.
That, in effect, also caused them to put in suspended ceilings that covered up a lot of the ornamentation and the detail and the interesting parts of the building, really.
But the biggest change they made was in the rotunda, or the atrium, where they floored over at every level to create additional office space.
They put in these huge steel beams across the atrium and created floors, more floor space for mechanical rooms.
Well, the interior of the dome, of course, the skylight had been removed in the 50s renovation when they floored over the atriums.
The exterior of the building was altered as well.
In 1910, there are two major entrances. Fannin, which is the main entrance, and then San Jacinto. And they both had monumental staircase. The Fannin entrance was much bigger.
They took the monumental staircase off both the east and west sides and put the entrance down to really down to the ground level, the first level.
And so when people came in, they would come into the basement level, and they no longer got this vision of the marble staircases from that first floor entry that was original.
There was no sense of that grandeur and the natural light and the marble and the stained glass and everything that you would have gotten originally.
And then from the bottom level, you could take elevators up to the upper floors, so you were not impressed.
You know, in the 50s, architecture had changed a lot. These giant lofty rooms, these grand entrances, and the marble and the stained glass and everything that had made the building so special in 1910 was just so old-fashioned in the 1950s. The main courtroom is one of those casualties of the 50s alterations. It was originally a double-height courtroom with a mezzanine, very To Kill a Mockingbird looking.
The building's original terracotta and plaster ornamentations were considered out of date in the 1950s and were either covered up or removed.
They tore marble off the walls and put it up for sale on the courthouse lawn. And finally, they just said anyone who wants it can come take it. They just tore that stuff out. What'd they need that for?
Public telephone booths were installed on each floor of the building.
There were probably 2 or 4 phone booths per floor. You always had to know where the phone booths were, and when the court would take a break, you'd be running to try to get on a telephone. You didn't want to be heard by the jurors who'd be out there in the hall because anything you might be saying to a client on the phone or back to the office might affect the jury. Phone booths are not that long ago, but that's a part of the history of that courthouse that I remember.
By the 1990s, the once revered courthouse had become a neglected eyesore. Courtrooms were crowded beyond capacity and office areas were jammed.
Well, my first court was the hallway on the 4th floor. The building was already overcrowded. We had more courts and judges than there were courtrooms.
Nothing in the courthouse made sense. And so it was dirty. It wasn't maintained. There was a silly seal on the bottom of the atrium that actually came from when a movie was produced there, and they never took it off.
Well, I've been watching that building for a long time, and it was just very dreary. And the outside, despite its dome and everything, was also dreary, I think partially because it was so dirty.
In spite of its condition, the Harris County Courthouse was one of the busiest and most vital courthouses in Texas. Many significant cases were decided in its courtrooms.
1/3 of the litigation in Texas is in Harris County. We are the biggest county.
Always crowded. When I started practicing, there was a lot going on at the courthouse. Even though there were many fewer people in Harris County, lots of cases were tried, lots of lawyers were down there, lots of hearings, docket call on Friday afternoons. It was a busy place.
So we have the disputes between major Fortune 500 corporations down to just our small businesses.
Well, when courts recessed, people were milling around in the halls. People, particularly from the upper floors, people were trying to get on the elevator because a lot of people were going outside to smoke. It was kind of chaos.
So here we get to the 1990s. We're overcrowded. We have hallways. Every juror knows the hallways were filled with file cabinets.
People kept their records in boxes, boxed up for anyone to pick up and take. I mean, it was an untenable situation. Every closet was crammed.
I had a court reporter assigned a utility closet for an office. The electrical didn't work, and we could not use any of the innovative technology that was coming along in the courts because we only had one electric plug in the whole courtroom, and you couldn't add anything to it or it blew the electricity. The building was crumbling around us.
Restoring the courthouse would be a formidable job. First, the architects had to remove the extensive structural alterations made in the 1950s. Then they had the daunting task of researching and recreating many of the original design elements that had been hidden or torn down over the years.
When they did those changes in the 1950s, you know, they would drill through ceilings, they would remove plasterwork.
The exterior of the building is primarily masonry materials, and one of the main materials was terracotta. And terracotta throughout the building was damaged extensively, broken pieces throughout.
The courthouse was originally designed to have 2 courtrooms, but by the 1990s it had been reconfigured to house more than 30 courtrooms.
The courtrooms were of odd sizes. They'd been made to fit, really chopped up.
So it was definitely a very grim building when we started.
Plans were underway by 2003 to restore the Harris County Courthouse and make it operational again.
So what we have right now, what we've done, we've surveyed the...
Working with the Texas Historical Commission, a master plan was developed which detailed the scope of work necessary to restore the building.
We'll need that. We'll definitely need that. Took us about a year of research and compiling documentation to put that together. We then applied for grant funding under the Courthouse Preservation Program.
But I think probably the biggest challenge is how do you take a 100-year-old building and implement all the modern-day amenities and still maintaining that historic integrity?
I think the hardest thing about the restoration was basically undoing what they had done in the 50s.
You know, even the ceiling in here is a story in itself that we didn't know until we started our selective demolition that this is what we uncovered.
Original paint colors and wood stains from 1910 were discovered during the gutting of the building. They used these samples to bring the building's interior back to the way it originally looked.
But it was only one little piece of what we did, and we're able to grab that one little piece and replicate it throughout the whole space.
When workers removed the 1950s linoleum flooring, they found original mosaic tile.
And it had been cut into, they had done trenches to lay electrical cabling and things like that, but the patterns were still there, the colors were still there, so much so that they were able to keep a lot of those original 1910 tiles.
And the tile itself, from what we understand, is they were placed one by one, all these tiles.
Exactly.
So you can imagine just an army of people just laying these things down.
One of the interesting things to me is they took the colors from the tile floors to recreate the skylight.
They couldn't find the drawings for the skylight or the dome itself. There were schematics, but never construction drawings. So they looked to 2 other courthouses in Texas that this firm had designed to make the best educated guess.
We took some photographs of the bow front balcony and enhanced those, enlarged them and enhanced them to be able to really get a good look at what the level of detail was.
Those are the actual ghost outline of the steps in the balcony. We'll know exactly right where to place the balcony to put our bow front balcony back in, up on the 2nd floor.
So it was a lot of detective work, which is true on a lot of the courthouse restorations.
Hundreds of craftsmen and artisans, including plasterers, carpenters, stoneworkers, and terracotta specialists, were brought in to work on the restoration project.
There were plaster motifs along the tops of all the ceilings. Only one complete motif existed, so they had to recreate them all using this one.
Samples of the distinctive marble were sent back to the original quarry in Georgia in the hopes that matching marble could still be found.
They tried to match them up to areas that they were removing marble today, and surprisingly enough, it still looks very similar 100 years later.
The original pinnacle, the crowning feature of the courthouse dome, was lost to history, so a new one was created.
The pinnacle that we put back on the dome, which is a replica of the original pinnacle, was designed based on the 1910 set of drawings.
Early artist renderings of the courthouse featured a statue on top of the dome and more statues around the pediment.
If you look at all the old photographs of the building from the 1910 to 1912 period, you can tell that none of those statues were ever put on. But the pinnacle was there up until sometime between 1925 and 1928, and we don't know where it went, so we did our replica pinnacle and put it back on.
Both monumental staircases were rebuilt.
Oh, the day they put that back was just, oh, my heart just leapt.
Another major challenge involved the restoration of the large rotunda, the central feature of the courthouse. 4 solid concrete floors that had covered the atrium since the 1950s would have to be carefully removed so that the rotunda could once again be open to the skylight.
So this was actually the open atrium, and we're kind of standing right below where the dome would be and where the original skylight would be.
After 2 years of construction work, the restoration of the 1910 Harris County Courthouse was complete. The courthouse had been transformed from an out-of-date building into a superbly restored landmark in downtown Houston. The 2011 grand reopening attracted a large crowd of residents, officials, and heritage tourists. They delighted in discovering unique architectural details that had been hidden from view for nearly 60 years.
Oh, when I walked in that building and I looked up and saw the rotunda, I just couldn't believe it. I had tears in my eyes.
It is so beautiful, everything that they've done to it, and to understand the glory of that building and what people saw when they walked into it in 1910, 1911 for that dedication. You can really understand it.
Well, when you walk up those steps going into the building, it really gives you a sense that you're somewhere important.
For a long time, I thought the building was gray granite, and now since the restoration, it's actually pink. So it's got this very nice base of pink granite, Texas granite.
The striking combination of colors, selected over 100 years ago, has lent a sense of authenticity to the interior spaces of the building.
And at first, when you start seeing some of the colors, some of the greens and some of the whites and some of the grays, you can't imagine that they actually work, especially in the courtroom. You're just amazed at how everything really kind of comes together in a very warm way.
Outstanding architectural features, hidden for decades by grime and neglect, now shine.
There's carving and ornamentation all over the outside of the building. When the sun hits the building, it really picks out all those details. It's just one of those things you could stand there and look at for hours.
We of course love the building, the way it turned out.
The majestic, restored rotunda, with its stunning stained glass dome, now dazzles courthouse visitors.
When you walk in and you look forward and you see that atrium, you're drawn to the atrium to look up.
What it reminds me of is a kaleidoscope. When you look up through the rotunda and the sun is coming in, and it's an interesting feeling when you stand in the middle of the room and look straight up.
It looks different at different times of the day, just from the different angles of the light coming into the dome.
It's one of the most spectacular spaces in town.
Well, it's not only a beautiful building, but it's an operating courthouse for the 1st and 14th Court of Appeals, and it's a very useful building as well as a beautiful building.
And that's what preservation does. It's recreating the feeling that the architects wanted you to have when you walked into the building, and they've really done that.
Once again a working courthouse, this historic building serves the people of Harris County and Texas.
What people don't realize about Houston is that we share something with the smallest county seat in Texas, a courthouse square. We have this magnificent courthouse that is a reminder of our history.
I think people are yearning more than ever to hold on to the roots in a fast-growing, a little more modern and modern-focused city like Houston.
I have a hard time not being emotional. It's hard to explain how I felt about it.
And really is just a jewel to the whole community.
A community that is faster with the wrecking ball than it is with saving beautiful buildings. We have not only saved a building, it has been restored to optimal glory.
You don't find buildings like that. You don't find marble like that. You don't find molding like that. You don't find windows like that. It's a spectacular space.
I hope that the courthouse restoration is a sign of things to come. I hope that it's a sign that Houston is taking its history more seriously.
With its dome standing tall and majestic, and its impressive rotunda reminding visitors of the legacy of this historic building, the courthouse stands as a testament to early county leaders and their vision and confidence in the growth of Houston.
It was definitely, in our opinion, worth the time and the effort that we put into it.
Houston and Harris County residents can be proud of this building and be proud of the county's effort to restore it.
We have a building that just passed its 100th anniversary. It now has a restored sense of dignity.